If Russia was a cloud looming over Trump's administration, it's now a full-blown tornado. From where I'm joined by Dan Rather, anchor and managing editor of Dan Rather Reports on Access TV, and Jon Meacham, the great historian and author of a great book, the great book, on the first President Bush, Destiny and Power. Gentlemen, Dan, shades of Watergate, clearly. The president taking the heat for firing the man investigating him. That's the simplicity of it. Your thoughts?
It is. Well, first of all, there's something very Nixonian about all of this, not the least of which being what you pointed out, that President Trump fired the acting Attorney General, Ms. Yates. Then he fired the federal attorney in New York, Mr. Bahara. Then he fires Comey. What they all have in common, they were all investigating Donald Trump. Look, it's no secret about what's going on here, as several people have already pointed out. What's going on here is an effort to cover up the facts. Why they're so desperate to cover up the facts, we do not know. And whether one's a Republican, a Democrat, or what have you, it's an important point in American history because our whole system is built on justice and the idea that no person is above the law. President Trump, because he has the powers of the presidency, has great powers to slow down any investigation, if not indeed to stop it. What's absolutely imperative here, it's very obvious, is a bipartisan independent commission to get the facts on what happened with the Russians and the Trump campaign. What, if anything, actually happened there? And two, get a special prosecutor to prosecute those, if any, who committed crimes. It's simple, it's deep, it's important. It's a very important moment in our history.
You know, John, you've written about all this history, and I think going back to when this country turned sour, I think it was during Vietnam, and Dan was covering it, and then, of course, Watergate. I think it's all connected. This spiraling down of confidence that public officials will do their jobs and not just look out for themselves. I don't care if you're a Trumpite or anti-Trump. People seem to fall into those categories pretty easily now. I don't see how in either category, as Dan said, would you think this was something that was done for the nation? This is done for Donald J. Trump, not for the nation or for a class of working people.
Unquestionably. I mean, I think the White House talking point all day has been this was a decisive action, as if an action itself is a virtue. And I think it's the act of a strong man. The other thing I think, not to be overly cute about it, but this is as though 7 Days in May were remade with Frederick March as the president plotting as a Russian stooge. And it's been 7 days. Comey testified on the 3rd of May to Congress, the Yates testimony, and then within a week, you have Comey dispatched. And I think Dan's right. I think that there is an anxiety here. My own sense is that President Trump simply cannot handle the idea that there's an uncontrollable element that might pose a threat to him. And so he's doing everything he can to neutralize those threats.
Well, as news spread today that Trump fired James Comey, his aides banded together and delivered the same message, as you say, John, about the president's decisiveness. Let's watch.
The president has made very clear he's going to act like a leader. He's going to make decisive, resolute actions when he is faced with evidence.
People in the Justice Department made a very strong recommendation. The president followed it, and he made a quick and decisive action to fire James Comey.
Yesterday, President Donald Trump provided strong and decisive leadership. That's not what this was about. The president took strong and decisive leadership here.
The deputy
leadership here, I think, represents the kind of strong leadership that the American people expect. He took decisive action. He provided strong leadership to act on the recommendation.
You know, Dan, back in the day, you were covering the White House. I remember Nick Van Hoffen talked about these people, these spokespeople, these flacks, as Schwarzwald clock figures. They come out like cuckoos. And they all come out and they just repeat the same phrases over. You just saw the Vice President of the United States then reading from a script of 2 words, decisive and action. I mean, he had to say it over and over again because he didn't have a longer leash.
Well, it's a strong and decisive action to continue and deepen a cover-up, which accentuates the question, what is it that the president is afraid is going to be found out about his campaign and the Russians' campaign to be involved in the presidential election? Look, they must be hiding something because they're working so hard to hide it. And the cover-up continues. And it's been successful for the last 24 to 36 hours because in many ways it's changed the conversation from what is it that they're hiding, what is it they're afraid of, to, well, Comey deserved to be fired, and emails from a year and a half ago. All of that, it's smokescreen, it's cover. I'll be very surprised if it fools very many among the American people. Chris, you know what's needed here. What's needed here are some Republican leaders. The Republicans have the White House, they have the Supreme Court, they have the Congress. This is going to require some Republican office holders with guts who say to themselves, I want the Trump administration to succeed, I want my party to succeed, but more importantly, I want to do what's good for the country. And they know in that secret place behind their hearts that what's good for the country is an independent bipartisan commission with a special prosecutor.
Well, we had Sam Ervin in your day and my day. We had Sam Ervin from North Carolina. I think it's Richard Burr this time. Anyway, CBS News caught up with Russian President Vladimir Putin today and asked him about the firing of Comey. The former KGB agent, that's the president over there, defended the president's decision over here. Let's watch.
How will the firing of James Comey affect U.S.-Russia relations?
There will be no effect.
Ваш вопрос выглядит, вы не сердитесь, пожалуйста, он выглядит смешным для меня.
Your question looks very funny for me. Don't be angry with me.
Мы не имеем к этому никакого отношения.
We have nothing to do with that.
Президент Трамп действует в рамках своей компетенции.
President Trump
Конституции и законов.
is acting in accordance with his competence and in accordance with his law and constitution.
Мы здесь при чем?
And what about us? Why we?
John, anybody who grew up in the Cold War has to think of this as the biggest hoot in the world. There we have the president of Russia, technically elected, technically the victor in an actual election, which is really not exactly the way we do it. They're in a hockey costume during the Stanley Cup Finals. There he is showing up on American television through a translator saying that the president of the United States is innocent of the scandal to which he's accused. It is an enigma wrapped in a riddle, whatever. How do you figure this thing out? Look at this stuff.
Well, I was so reassured that he said we have nothing to do with that. The fact that the Russian president has to say that is a sign of where we are. Dick Cheney said that if Russia is guilty of meddling in our elections, it's an act of war. And that's where we are, and it's going to, as we were just talking about, it's going to get put in the Cuisinart of our current political culture, and it's going to be, you know, the White House wants it to be about strong, decisive action. That's the talking point to the Trump base, that the Washington bedwetters are being hypocritical. You know, hypocrisy is the air most human beings breathe, but that's not dispositive here. What's dispositive is a foreign power continuing to have a disproportionate influence over our policy, over our country, over our sovereignty, for God's sake. And why conservative Republicans aren't obsessed with this is one of the enigmas of the era.
Well, it's not very nationalist to allow this to happen. Thank you, Dan Ryan. It's an honor to have you on, as always. I got to cut it off now. Jon Meacham, thank you, sir. I love your books. The one on George Herbert Walker Bush is really a piece of great work. Anyway, up next, there it is. Take a look at that. You got to get that book this weekend. They still sell these books at bookstores, too.